If I continue to contract my muscle in this way, at a certain point there'll be a time when I can no longer move it. My muscle fatigues to a point that there's actually a physiological inability to contract, even though the muscle's still receiving this signal to contract from my brain. So why is this the case? What occurs at this point in the muscles where the muscles can no longer contract? The answer is we don't know exactly, but there are a few hypotheses. The first hypothesis is that the muscle runs out of energy. Now, ATP is the main energy store inside our muscles, and outside of extreme stress, when examined, even heavily fatigued muscles have diminished but ample stores of ATP in them, meaning that it's possibly unlikely the muscles completely run out of energy. So, unlikely to be the reason for that continued inability to move. The second hypothesis is a buildup of waste products, for example inorganic phosphates or lactic acid, which has always been assumed a cause of fatigue. As these accumulate both inside and outside the muscle cells, also called muscle fibers, it's possible that these waste products, usually acidic, and these could impact on the calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. As we know, calcium is a trigger required for contraction, so anything that inhibits the release of calcium could cease muscle contraction. However, it's relatively simple to test the pH of muscle after a normal degree of fatigue, and it's consistently found that the muscle remains within acceptable pH limits. So, excess accumulations of waste, such as lactic acid, are also unlikely to be the cause. The third hypothesis is a disturbance of excitation-contraction coupling, either somewhere down the chain, through the nerves, brain to the nerves, or directly at the junction where the nerves and the muscle meet. You see, skeletal muscles require nerve impulses to do anything. Without a nerve impulse, they will not contract. So if something goes wrong or inhibits the pathway between the brain, the nerves, and the junction to the muscles, contraction will be halted. Now, nerves are a delicate part of our body, and impulses of nerves involve the ions sodium and potassium. Sodium rushes inside the nerve cell during an action potential or an impulse, generating an impulse, and then potassium rushes outside the nerve cell to help prepare it for the next impulse. Now, just before the next one can start, the nerve needs to reset. It does this by pumping sodium back outside and potassium back inside. However, in this process of sodium rushing out or potassium, what happens if some of those ions move out of the way? What happens if some potassium gets lost in that initial impulse? So this then means that there's less potassium and less sodium for the next impulse, so on and so on. Eventually, our nerves have lost the many ions that it needs, or enough ions to reset itself properly. So our brain sends a signal to contract, but our muscle never actually receives that signal. That would cease contraction. So there's a few hypotheses, and we're not sure which one or if something else is involved. Likely, it's possibly a combination of all three: lowered muscular energy, waste building up, and ionic changes to that excitation contraction or that nerve impulse pathway. I hope this video has given you a better insight into the working of our skeletal muscles.